Between Me and the Night is an enigma. The entire experience is a roughly 2-hour emotional expedition through the life and mind of its protagonist, and the journey is rife with puzzles to solve and obstacles to overcome. The gameplay is a mishmash of elements from multiple genres that, while not necessarily excelling as individual representatives of their type, are implemented well enough to be enjoyable. This is important, as they are vital pieces of the game's surrealistic and oftentimes nightmarish world, and are crucial to the player's understanding of the narrative. The game is composed of 3 chapters, with each chapter taking place within a specific time in the boy's life. Chapter 1 is the house, 2 is the school, and 3 is the apartment. Pretty early on, it's established that you're lonely, you don't have many friends, your older brother is mean to you, and your parents argue a lot. This sets the tone for the story going forward, which I won't spoil here. Despite 0 spoken dialogue, the game does a tremendous job of making you feel isolated thanks to its visuals and sound design. For example, your family and friends are displayed as ghostly apparitions whom, in their very representation, are distant from you. They're there, but they're not there. They're different. They're not you. They don't understand you. This is as people might feel sometimes, and so everyone else apart from the boy is presented as these projections. They come and go as the story unfolds, apparating or melting away into the game's world. What's physical are the monsters that can attack you. They hunt you and prey upon you, and generally make it more difficult for you to succeed at whatever it is you may be doing. How you handle them is reflective of where you are in the boy's life. For example, a teenager in high school will need a hall pass in order to walk the halls without being accosted, whereas a young boy might deal with ghosts by simply turning on a light. The difference between how the boy perceives his peers and how he perceives these monsters, that is to say the metaphysical versus the physical, is representative of the boy's cognitive dissonance. He is conflicted, and so we see and hear that in the world. It's quite beautiful. Gameplay in each chapter revolves around you navigating your environment and solving puzzles to unlock access to other areas. These segments are extremely similar to your average point-and-click game. Much of your time will be spent interacting with the world by way of collecting and combining items to produce different results. What's different is that sometimes you'll need to push or pull objects, usually chairs, in order to either reach an item or complete a puzzle. I didn't find things too challenging in this respect. The game's logic when it comes to its solutions wasn't grim Fandango levels of bonkers, nor was any of it obtuse as perhaps Shadowgate sometimes is. The difficulty here is actually finding what you need, and this is where the game can occasionally be frustrating. Important items or clues can be extremely hard to see, which results in much of your time being spent wandering around the world, hovering your cursor over anything and everything that could potentially be interactable, as the telling white glow isn't there otherwise. It's a minor complaint, as it personally didn't impede my progress too much overall, but I can definitely see others getting irritated because something as small as a key on the ground eluded them due to it blending with the environment. Early in the game, you find out that the boy is a fan of 2 fictional games, 1000 Nights and Generic Night, and you'll actually have the opportunity to play these games within, the game. These serve as quite pleasant distractions between the sometimes slow burn of Between Me and the Night's core gameplay, but the game does go out of its way to hide these distractions. For example, in the high school level, I had to find the charger and game cartridge before I could play Generic Night. Admittedly, I didn't progress too far within these minigames, as I was anxious to return to the main plot, but they were fun, seemingly competent 8-bit throwbacks to games of old. It's important to mention these minigames, and more importantly the boy's love of knights, because the chapters themselves are bridged by short combat levels that have you assume the role of an actual knight in what the game calls the Otherworld. These were by far my favorite sections of the game. The wind howls across the snowy landscape, and wooden roped bridges creaked as you walked across them. The place is littered with ruined, statuesque representations of the people and items you encountered in the chapter before, and their inclusion here as decrepit stone idols sell the idea behind this otherworldly place as being an area completely apart from the real world, or perhaps your own mind. It's an extremely cold and lonesome area that immediately gave me the same sort of vibe I might get from a Souls game. You are a lone wanderer, haunted by your past, or perhaps a past. I mentioned that this was a combat zone, and it is. You are armed with a sword and a shield, capable of a simple block and 3-strike sword attack. The enemies you'll encounter will either be axe-wielding spirits or bowmen. Combat is simple. Hack them to pieces. The game's hit detection is a bit wonky, and the controls aren't precise enough to cancel a sword swing and immediately raise your shield to block an oncoming arrow. It's clear the game wasn't designed around combat, but it's forgiven due to the fact that I'm pretty sure you can't die here. I've taken numerous arrows and sword strikes to the face and never went down, and there isn't any kind of vitality meter present either. One wonders then why you have a shield to block attacks with, so it's entirely possible I just didn't get hit enough. It's an interesting bit of gameplay because it's the only time in the game where you have real power over your foes, and I imagine this goes back to the boy feeling defenseless in life and wanting to be like the heroes he adores. Admittedly, it's beyond me how exactly these segments fit within the overall narrative, which itself is very open to interpretation, especially after seeing the game's final conclusion. On that note, the ending itself was a tad bit disappointing to me. During the last leg of the game, you're presented with what seems like a choice, but there is in fact only one right way, as the choice I made resulted in an immediate return to the beginning of the sequence. It was unfortunate, as there seemed to be opportunity here for the player to perhaps come to their own conclusion as to the nature of the game's events. Are you living in a reality, or are you dreaming? That was how I interpreted this sequence at any rate, so I was bummed to find it could only go one way. Between Me and the Night was a thought-provoking experience that dealt with very common themes such as loneliness, fear, sadness, and love, and centered them around a character whom anybody could identify with on some level. Visually, it was an enticing blend of familiar imagery dotted with surrealistic quirkiness that teased you with the idea that this could all be one bad dream, but not so much so that you were convinced it was. The game's sound design and quiet, melancholic score were adept at providing atmosphere and setting the mood, especially during tromps through the otherworld. The game's biggest weakness is in its simplistic, occasionally boring point-and-click-esque puzzle design, but I was intrigued by its fascinating art direction and plot, which is to me no doubt the game's strength, and it was enough to keep me interested. It's not a perfect point-and-click, platformer, or fighting game, but it does a well enough job of meshing elements from these genres together into a competent experience that tackles overall its core themes of depression and insanity, and I enjoyed my time with it as a result.